You're listening to The Lowdown, a podcast inspired by the creative people in the bass making community. I'm Frankie. I'll be sitting down with bass makers to explore what drives them creatively and to find out what challenges they face in the business of bass. Let's find out what it's all about. Let's get The Lowdown. Hey, welcome back to The Lowdown. This is Frank, and I am super stoked. I have Anthony Olinger here today from Xylem Basses and Guitars. Hey, Anthony, welcome to the show, man. Thanks for coming on.
Absolutely, Frank. Thank you very much for having me. I'm really excited to talk to you today.
Man, I've been checking out your basses, and you make some, just really cool stuff. And you got some shapes I've never seen anybody else really do before. When did you get started, I guess, or how did you decide one day, hey, I think I want to try making guitars or basses? How did that work for you?
Yeah. So I built my first bass in 2006. It was my last semester of college. I was going to Colorado State University for a degree in zoology. And when was it? Yeah, beginning of my last semester, I was trying to learn that Primus song, John the Fisherman, on a PV 5-string bass I had. It was either a 34 or 35-inch scale, and it was just too big for me. It's that's when you play John the Fisherman, it's power chords at the first fret, going up the first 3 steps or something like that.
Yeah, he has a really tight spacing too, right?
I found out his main, that Carl Thompson 4-string that he played for so many years, was a 32-inch scale. So I found that it was a little shorter. Plus, I hear he's like 7 feet tall, and he's got these huge, kielbasa fingers and stuff. So anyway, I looked around for a short scale bass, and being in college, I couldn't afford the, $2-3 grand that I was finding them for. And I said, well, I've got some woodworking experience. Maybe I should just try building one. Why not? I worked at a place called the Sunset Event Center at the time, and they had a shop upstairs, and they were going to let me use it. So cool. I walked around to a bunch of my professors, and all the biology ones laughed me out of the room. Obviously, the music guys, I went to the music department and tried to get a credit for building the bass, and I got a credit for building it. So I finished that first bass 2 weeks before I graduated, and I was like, man, this is a lot more fun than what I've been doing. The building that bass was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed it. So I moved to Chicago after that for a couple of years and got a job at a music store. And then I started the business officially in 2008. And I've been going strong ever since.
That's really cool. No, out of curiosity, what were you studying instead of building basses? I guess
zoology. So
that's right. You said that. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Study of animals. It's basically biology. But yeah,
that's super cool. Yeah. Did you have a particular part of zoology that you were specifically into, or is it more general and broad, basically?
Well, when I first went to college, I was like, in high school, I thought I was going to be a veterinarian. And then I volunteered at one for a while and realized that was not what I wanted to do. It was I wanted to work with animals, but you work with the people so much more, and they're a fair amount of them are pretty crazy. So I still wasn't sure what I wanted to do. I just went to college and got the degree anyways. Towards the end, though, I started getting interested in spider silks, because they're pound for pound, they're stronger than steel and tougher than Kevlar. I did my honors thesis on spider silks and was pretty interested in that. Cool. But the bases won out. I miss it a little bit. Part of me wants to go back and make synthetic spider silk, bass strings, and come back.
Hey, you're young, man. You still got time to do all kinds of stuff.
I'm
spider
on
silk
the
bass guitar renaissance, man. That you mentioned you had some woodworking experience before college. What was that, and how did you come about that woodworking experience?
Oh, my dad was a woodworker. He kind of did a lot of hobby stuff. He knew how to build a lot of random things. So I grew up around bandsaws and table saws and things like that. I actually, probably to his chagrin, I wasn't that interested in it most of the time. He kind of had to force me to do it until I found basses. I was never really interested in cabinetry or anything like that. But I did enough projects with him that I was able to get some basic experience, and enough to start out at least, although I had a very long way to go when I started. It's been a big learning curve. There was lots of swearing on certain days.
Oh, you bet. What's like one of your first big mistakes you remember making that you had to kind of fix?
Oh,
That
let's see.
happens all the time. It's like, okay, I made this mistake. Now how do I fix it so I can continue on without starting from scratch? That's kind of like the
Right. Let's
yeah.
see. Well, I got really, it was almost like divine providence. My first couple of bases, I got really lucky on a few things. I didn't really check the bridge height versus how deep I put the neck in the pocket on the
Gotcha.
first couple,
Yeah.
and I just got lucky.
It's not something you think about if you've never done it before,
Yeah, it's the number of things that you learn. I mean, I've been doing it for what, 12, 13 years as a business now.
Wow.
And you still learn things every single day. Some days you're like, I just want a regular day where things go smoothly. I don't have to learn anything new or fix a new mistake, but I'm still not there. I still learn stuff
Well,
all
I
the
mean,
time.
I know people that have been building for a very long time, and it's just being a human being. I mean, especially when you consider how all encompassing and how many different skill sets are involved in just making a guitar. It's just kind of, in terms of like the design aspect and the woodworking aspect and electronics and finishing and just being able to set an instrument up or do fret work and all this kind of stuff. Basically you're kind of like an engineer and an artist, and there's so many steps. It's amazing that if you only have one mistake, that's incredible. I mean, really.
Yes, very incredible. The first I thought of it. The first big mistake I made was on the third bass I ever made was a 6-string fretless, and at the time I was just using a little, I think it was a little jet jointer or something like that to flatten my fingerboards and my necks and stuff, and then I wouldn't do any extra beyond that. I just didn't have enough experience to know that you should. So I wasn't really happy with the joint between the fretboard and the neck. You could see a little seam. So I was like, well, when I carve the neck, I'll just carve the sides a little bit and hope that, when I carve the joint where the fretboard meets the neck, that I'll find a spot where there's not as much of a glue seam. And I ended up carving it way too narrow for it to even be a 6-string. It was a total disaster. It was the only neck I've ever had to scrap, actually, my third one, but I had to completely scrap it. And I was leaving to move to Chicago soon, so I had to order new materials and try to get it done as fast as I could. So that one hurt. That one
I bet it did.
yeah, I sat around in my room that evening and was like, how am I going to let this not happen again? And it's you learn some stuff. You learn how to not let certain things happen again, but then something new always happens, and you gotta. The philosophy that we should all have is you turn your mistakes into your triumphs. It's
Right.
yeah, and you don't like the sound of that right after you made the mistake. You're like, I don't
Of
want to do
course
that.
not.
I just wish it hadn't gone wrong in the first place. But yeah, that was one of my first really big mistakes. But I've done a bunch of other things. I've drilled through bodies when trying to connect pickup pockets to control cavities, and the wood's always challenging as well. You use all these exotics, and one behaves a certain way and is perfectly
Yeah.
smooth. Another one is brittle and terrible, and you get a big chunk out of it. Doing something very nice to it, which shouldn't have happened. There's so many times you get a little flake of glue or a little flake of wood that pops up, and you got to get up the super glue and push it back down, and hope that it's not noticeable.
Well, right. I mean, not everything behaves like maple, if only it
Right?
did,
Seriously. Or mahogany. My
Yeah,
ideal
that
would
too.
be
Yeah.
everything behaves like mahogany, because maple's even a little, it's
Depending.
easier than ebony, but yeah.
Yeah. Well, especially, I mean, I guess I'll take that back. I mean, obviously, if you're just working with, especially when you start getting into like really heavily figured wood, like stuff that's close to the, like the crotch of the tree. Like I've got some really, I've kind of turned into a wood hoarder, and but I've got like a ton of really nice, like bird's eye and some really curly stuff, and I can only imagine, what kind of, especially a couple things where there's just like almost some burly kind of knots almost forming. I can imagine that's depending on what's happening in those places. Hopefully, I'm not planning on using it in a very structural place. Hope luckily, but boy, I can see how just different densities and just different grains moving in different directions in certain places. It can pose a problem, and then obviously woods like wenge just give everybody trouble. I mean, it just seems like what you would do with a tight grained wood, you wouldn't necessarily want to do with wenge. It seems like you can like lose chunks pretty easily. especially if you've got like dull knives. I mean, probably don't run it through a planer is probably a bad idea, you know, for all kinds of
Yeah.
size. Yeah,
Just the drum sander is the way to go. I actually
yeah,
don't even, I had a planer
abrasives for
for a
sure.
while, but I don't even have a planer anymore. I just,
Yeah,
resaw on the bandsaw and then use the drum sander because it's
yeah.
almost everything I work with tears out. So yeah. And with Wenge, like you said, here, you're getting splinters all the time and it's brittle. And
Yeah.
I built this bass a couple of years ago. It's a 5-string. It's actually a true piccolo bass. It's only a 30-inch scale, and it's an octave up from a normal bass
Oh,
guitar.
cool.
But it had this beautiful maple burl on it, or it was, I guess, I suppose it was spalted maple, but the maple, I mean, parts of it had the consistency of maple, and then parts of it were like balsa wood. I mean, it was,
Yeah.
when I glued that top together, it was maybe 3/16 of an inch thick, and every time you picked it up, you gently, you barely grab it with your fingertips, and you don't let the wind hit it too hard. One time
Right.
I picked it up by the corner and it just broke off.
Oh
It
gosh.
I was real happy when I got that glued to the body of the
Oh, I
bass
bet.
finally.
What was your method for stabilizing it? I know I've seen people like you working with really like spalted wood or Buckeye burl kind of stuff where it's just practically falling apart, So pretty much either like just soaking it with a CA glue or attempting or doing epoxy or something to try to get it to hold together essentially. Sometimes
Yeah,
it's
super glue, CA
yeah.
glue. The thin stuff from Stumac,
Yeah.
I went through, a bottle or two of that stuff, getting the whole, because it was a big chunk. It was like a 4/4 or maybe even a 6/4 piece
It,
that I carved, that I, cut up in slices in the bandsaw. And first I probably used a whole bottle just stabilizing it before I even
oh,
cut
sure.
into it. And then when you're carving
Nasty
it,
stuff. Yeah.
oh man, and for a minute there, I was like, is this going to work? Am I going to be
Right.
able to pull this piece off? And
Man.
carving it was real fun. Well, it wasn't real fun, but it was, you kind of carve it close, and then you sort of stabilize a piece so that it carves well. And then you have carved into all your stabilized portion. You got to pour super glue on it again. That was a challenge. That was a very time consuming base. It
Oh,
came
for
out
sure.
great though. It was a good one.
Well, it seems like probably every time with something like that, you remove a little bit of material, you kind of have to reset yourself and really think of like where you are and really take your time with it and kind of re-examine what comes next. Where if you kind of fall into that trap of thinking of it just being like normal wood, you're just gonna make a huge mistake. That
Absolutely. Yeah. It
yeah.
was, I started working on it and I was like, this is completely different than anything I've worked on before. And that's one of the cool things about Lutherie is you don't get real bored real easily. Some days you
No.
wish you were a little bit bored, but most of the time you're,
Right.
you're, you're challenging yourself. You're doing new stuff.
Yeah.
You're like, which tools do I even use for this? Cause usually it's chisels and gouges, but for that, it was like sanding sticks and dragging rasps and things like that. So, yeah.
I mean, I'm sure. I mean, you can kind of see the allure, I suppose, of folks who have like real, like you have some models in your on your website and stuff. Imagine being like a Fender, where like, oh, I have to make like 1,000 P bass, deluxes right now or something. Just to be in that sort of position where obviously everything is, especially when you're dealing with custom work, everything and the wood's different every time and everything is very much a kind of a one-off. Even if it's a model you've technically made before, it's probably always going to be something different for the customer or that sort of thing, I would imagine, right?
Yeah, well, it's funny you say that. Everything I build is fully custom, and I've
Yeah.
only built like two. I've never made an official model.
Gotcha.
Once or twice, someone has asked me for something very similar to what I've already built, but it's almost always been almost every base I've made is a one-off. And
Gotcha.
and I know exactly what you mean about, you got to make 1,000 identical P bases. I could definitely
Yeah.
see getting bored with that. But part of me these days is kind of pining for that a little bit. It's like
Yeah.
I keep telling myself I got to make some standard models so that I can. I mean, the doing one-offs all the time takes like 2, 3, 4 times longer than making a model.
Oh, for
And part of
sure.
me is like, okay, it's time to make some models, that I can just have on hand, go through them real quick, make jigs for them and things like that, so that I'm not
Well,
measuring everything every time. And
yeah.
also the custom thing's tough because it's really hard to foresee what will or won't go wrong. Sometimes you run into a problem later that you're like, man, that's obvious. I should have seen that in the beginning, but and then you got to roll with it. It's
Well,
it
and
builds your endurance.
and there's a pressure to it too, especially if you have a customer and you've selected certain woods and it's unique, and obviously if it gets messed up, there's no backup plan sometimes, right? So if God
Yeah,
forbid
that's a major part of the stress, is like, this piece
yeah.
of wood cost me $400 and I'm not
Right.
making that much on the base
No.
anyways. So, every little bit you're losing money, there's
Yeah.
always an opportunity to lose money. And then, sometimes, especially with the custom stuff, your customers sometimes change their mind in the middle of stuff,
Oh,
and
yeah.
you try to accommodate it. But then, usually I end up, probably making a little more fair to them than I should.
Yeah.
But they're almost always, actually, I can't say I've ever had an unhappy customer. I'm the kind of, your reputation is so much of your business
Indeed. Yeah.
in this field, that I'm always saying, look, anything you're unhappy with, send it back to me, we'll make it right. So
Well, and that's an interesting thing too, where like, I mean, have you ever had somebody who contacted you about making an instrument, and then maybe over the course of speaking with them to figure out what was going on, have you ever decided, maybe I don't want to work with this person, or maybe I don't want to tackle this particular thing, maybe it's just isn't something I want to take on, or have you gotten like that sort of feeling?
I've had the feeling. I've never actually
Yeah.
done that. I almost every time I commit to doing something new that's relatively fancy, in the middle of doing it, I'm like, why did I agree to do this? Why do I hate myself? But then it usually comes out, and you get a lot better. Now you have a new experience under your belt. You have what to fall back on next time when you do another hard thing like that. So I have turned down a few things. I've had a couple of guys ask me for acrylic bodied instruments, and I've worked with acrylic a little bit for like inlay and stuff. There's this really cool company called Mazecraft Supply that makes abalone that's kind of underneath acrylic, so it's thicker, but working with acrylic is just a nightmare. So I turned those kind of things down. But a lot of the other stuff I'll almost always attempt, at least, and it almost always comes out pretty well.
Yeah, I mean, and that's, I mean, I know for myself, like I would, if I had to work with something like acrylic, I think I'd want to like, make something for myself first, if not a couple somethings, just to make sure I've got this down, and want to even attempt to offer it to somebody, I guess. It's just one of those things, because there's such a fly by the seat of your pants, kind of just the potential for disappointment is huge, when you're doing something like that the first time around. You've never done it before, and you're doing it for somebody at the same time, just crazy.
That's usually what I tell people is I'm like, look, I would do that for you, but it'll be my first one. I'd hate to charge you as much as I'd have to charge for it. And, like you said, let me build 2 or 3 of them, and then, I'll get a hold of you if they come out good enough, and I'm confident to charge you what I need to for that.
And wouldn't you really rather have a base made out of this really beautiful wood over here?
Yeah. Yes, always with the alternatives. Yeah, it's like, you sure you don't want this?
And that's something I like with the folks I've spoken to and people who I've known who have been building. There's universally this love of wood that just seems to like drive like a good. I don't know what the percentage would be, but there's just something about the fact that we just all like love the material that the instruments are made out of as part of some of the driving force that makes us want to keep doing it, I suppose, as well. I mean, what are the things that like obviously, if you want to get really extremely wealthy, I mean, probably being a custom bass maker isn't the first thing that people would think of, but so what's your driving but the force behind you wanting to do this, and what keeps you going with it and everything?
Yeah, you could probably get rich easier being a fry cook than a custom bass builder. But the wood was definitely one of the things that really interested me. Like I was, that first ebony fretboard I ordered, I'd never really seen ebony outside of a fretboard, and I hadn't even seen that many ebony fretboards at the time. So that was really cool. I was really excited about that. It was really fun to find out how I hadn't thought of it ahead of time, but each wood smells so differently. Some of them are really appealing, like the rosewoods are kind of cinnamony, the ebony's kind of got a chocolate thing to me. Zebra wood kind of smells like feet, which is kind of a bummer, but the rest of them are pretty appealing. I always liked that. So anytime I get to work with some new wood or get something I haven't seen before, that is definitely a driving force for me, in terms of keeping me interested. I guess I got into it because it's one of those things where I was just kind of drawn to it. I built that. I got into bass playing my first year in college, and I hadn't really been interested in music very much until I saw Les Claypool play, and I was like, wow, you can do that. You can play like that and sound like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So then, I started playing bass, and then I was always interested in his basses, and how they looked, obviously, if you look at my stuff. So that, I started poking around Carl Thompson's website a bunch, instead of, studying when I should be at college. And I just kind of fell in love with it.
That's probably a good sign, right? If you're doing the thing that you're doing instead of what you probably should be doing, that might be the thing that maybe you really want to do. Perhaps.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And there are times where I'm like, man, I should get a real job and make real money, but I love it. It's kind of a calling. It's not always. You don't love it every single day. There's definitely even your dream job. There's days where you're like, oh, I got to do this thing, but yeah, I just always enjoyed it. Ever since I started, I've enjoyed every instrument that I've made. So. I obviously I'm a bass player too. I haven't had much time to practice lately, but
boy, do I know that game.
Yeah, I know. I used to go an hour a day almost without fail. And then I moved to a new property that was multiple more acres and way more things to maintain and take care of and stuff like that. And I had to draw down the practicing quite a bit. I'm hoping to get back into it before too long. Nice. Oh, another thing I wanted to mention about the woods was, I was watching your podcast with Tim Sicer from
he's
Lowdown,
awesome.
Lowdown Basses. Yeah, he's a cool guy.
Yeah.
And I just turned absolutely green with envy when he mentioned Owl Hardwoods, because I used to go there too. I started the business when I was in Warrenville, Illinois.
Yeah.
And I miss that wood shop so much. That place was amazing. So I kind of had to. I almost turned it off. I was like, this is making me too jealous of not being there anymore.
Oh yeah. Now, obviously you made that first instrument for yourself when you were in college. How long did it take from that experience to suddenly somebody approaching you to make them an instrument? Like, at what point did you decide, like, hey, I should become a company and and hang your shingle out there? I mean, to do this sort of thing.
Well, I wanted, right after that first bass, I was like, this is what I'm doing with my life. This is what I want to do. Cool. And then when I moved to Chicago and met some people at the music store I worked at, they kind of talked me out of it for a little while, because they were like, you're not going to make any money, dude. Like, you're not going to make any money. And they were right. They really were.
Right.
Yeah. But that, it just didn't go away. I worked there for a couple of years, and I still really had the bug. And so in 2008, February-ish of 2008, I started the business. I quit my job there and said, all right, I'm just going to try it and see what happens, and caution to the wind and all that stuff. And then I made a couple stock instruments at that point. I think I sold one of them at Avenue N Guitars in Chicago. And I got my first order from a person out of nowhere in 2009. And then I never caught up after that. I haven't ever caught up with my backlog of orders since then. So I guess I'm doing the right thing.
I guess you are. I mean, that's probably not the worst position to be in, is to have enough orders, to never catch up. I mean, that's like a pretty perpetual thing. That's awesome.
Yeah, it's a good problem. It's good. It's stressful sometimes, because you're at least I am always late. It's sorry to any of my customers that are listening. I'm sorry. I'm going as fast as I can. Right. I swear.
Well, but that being said, though, I mean, it puts you in a position where, because I always ask, one of the things I always kind of ask is, how do you determine what your time is worth? So therefore, how, what do you, how do you figure out, how much it's going to take for you to make a particular instrument, and I know it's not an exact science always, but that's a tough thing. But obviously when you're in demand and there's a backlog, then uh you're not in a position where you feel like you have to charge less just because you won't get the gig, I guess, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, actually, I think I more than doubled my prices not too long ago to try to kind of curtail the orders a little bit, which it did to some degree, but they're still coming in. So it was the right move. I probably should have raised them sooner, really,
Sure.
given the quality of my work and stuff like that. But I also, part of me wishes I was just a multimillionaire and I'd just make free bases for people that were the right people for them, kind of thing. But
that's kind of the test, though, isn't it? Like, even if you're, and I feel the same way, if you're a multimillionaire, you still would do this anyway, and you probably would just just give the instruments away or something, because you just that tells you you're doing the right thing, right?
Yeah, it really does. Yeah.
That's super cool. Now, obviously, you had mentioned Carl Thompson. I could definitely see like an influence there, for sure. But you also have some shapes that are like, I can see the influence, but it's not like a direct thing. I mean, your shapes are completely unique, and I guess other than like the Les Claypool thing, like, is that how you basically found out about Carl Thompson? Like, was like just seeing Les Claypool, or were you aware of Carl Thompson before that, or?
No, rainbow bass, that six
Yeah,
string that Les
yeah,
plays. I mean the four string too, but that six string fretless rainbow bass is just so in your face and right there. That was what made me find Carl Thompson in the first place, was seeing that thing.
yeah, so cool. I mean, I remember reading an article about it, and how there's so many, even like different kinds of wood on the fingerboard. Just the idea that, and I guess he didn't have a piece of wood that was wide enough, so he just, which is one of the things that's always really cool about what you do and what Carl does, is like there's always just all of these pieces of wood that somehow all comes together and looks amazing, and totally on purpose. But I would imagine sometimes there's kind of a practicality to it, where if you have a smaller piece of wood, you can stretch it out by doing some cool arrangements of smaller pieces of wood that will look great together.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, you always end up with so many cutoffs that don't quite fit anywhere else. And then you're like, all right, I don't have enough place to put all these. So it's time to make a body or a neck or part of X, Y, and Z out of them. I don't know if you have ever seen those Conklin bases with the melted tops, where they have the curved joint between two kinds of wood. They have the big, they have a nice sweeping curve between like maple and ebony sort of thing. You ever seen anything like that?
Yeah, I haven't seen them in a while, but I've seen a lot of their custom shop stuff at some different galleries. I mean, just pretty crazy. I mean, everybody's familiar, obviously, with the more run of the mill kind of like the Bill Dickens, Conklin 7-string. But yeah, I mean, Conklin has just done some crazy custom stuff, for sure.
Yeah, I'm going to start doing some more of that kind of thing. I got a lot of fun plans for doing some, because you've seen the like the acrylic stabilized wood where it'll be a color. They put it in a vacuum chamber and it pulls the color all the way through the wood. I'm gonna play around with doing some mixes of colored wood and regular wood and different patterns and stuff. I mean, the sky's the limit with that sort of thing. I'm very excited about that.
Yeah,
and yeah.
There was a base on your website I was looking at, and it's got kind of a bluish kind of tint to it, and looks like it has wooden pickup covers, like some really stylized PB. And I was wondering if that was like stabilized wood like that, or if that was just like dye or stain, because there's kind of like a bluish sort of thing going on. I was going to ask you about how you did that and what was going on.
Yeah, that was just a stabilized piece of wood that the owner had found and picked out and everything.
Cool.
And it's got at that company I mentioned earlier, Maze Craft Supply, with all the inlay materials. We got some I think it was aquamarine polyester for the block inlays on that. That's where I got the abalone. There's a little turtle inlay on the fretboard on that one. Actually, if I can share my screen here, I want to show you one that's not on the website real fast. Yeah, there's another recent one. That one's not on the website yet, but I assume that's gonna be the new most popular bass on the website.
I love the ramp you got going on too. That's awesome.
Yeah, I lucked out with that.
Yeah.
I kind of got the
Boy, oh
butterfly
boy.
pattern.
Yeah.
People are going to think I'm copying Federa there with that little butterfly
Well,
shape.
hey, look, I mean, Federa didn't. I mean, maybe. I mean, I guess if we're talking about like maybe like single cutaway base or whatever. But I mean, look, I mean they don't own the single cut. I mean, it's like it's just. I mean, I think everybody who thinks it's like you're like ripping off Federa is just kind of like misguided.
Yeah, but it's got the single cut and the butterfly on the ram. Now it's the
Oh
double
boy,
whammy.
but
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 yes,
it's not.
I agree. It's
Yeah.
we don't really.
Well,
It's kind of the nice thing about the guitar building community
yeah.
is I think the story goes something like, I want to say Fender tried to patent the Strat shape, I don't know, a decade
Yeah.
after they'd been doing it. And the judge was like, look, there's too many companies making
Well,
this shape now. You can't. So the precedent was kind of set that, you get to do whatever. I think the headstock shape you get in trouble for, but the body
yeah.
shapes we all get to kind of share.
Well, even just a couple of years ago, Gibson, I think, had sued Dean. He was trying to like was trying to get Dean for like using the flying V and for
Right.
using, it's just like, my gosh, guys, it's
Yeah.
just seems crazy. I mean, the cool thing about this is like, this is like a natural pattern in the wood, which is like, what's great about wood, as opposed to, you didn't, go and, purposefully make uh, a big pearl, an abalone butterfly. And this is in a way, it's almost like nature's doing a Rorschach test with us. It's like, hey, here's this
Right.
pattern in the wood. What do you see here?
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Well,
Thanks
doctor,
for thanks for letting me show that one. I'm
yeah,
really happy
yeah,
with that, Dave.
yeah. Please feel free to show more.
Here, I got an, yeah, sure.
Yeah,
I'll
the
show
one
you
I
one.
was thinking of, it's one of the four strings. In fact, I think it's the first one under the four strings. It's got this kind of bluish kind of hue going through the center of the body
Yeah, I'll
on
switch
your
that
website.
one in a sec. This
Oh,
is
cool.
one I'm working on right now
Ooh,
with it's kind of got the, Earth from Mars look to it.
yeah. Oh,
And
that's
that's going
yeah.
to be a fan fret too, hence the individual bridges and
Oh
stuff.
man. So that's not gonna be a pick art. It's gonna be like inlaid right into the body.
Yeah,
That's
yeah, those are, yeah, that's just a curved joint
oh
with maple burl, into ebony, and then the blue stuff is that same, some cutoffs from that blue wood that
can't throw anything away, man. That's the reason why, right? You just never
yeah.
know, and you can find a use for it. That's incredible.
Here's that one you were talking
Yeah.
about.
But I mean that's really cool. I mean it just works out perfect there too. I mean, just in terms of the placement of the planets, and that's so cool.
This one, I even got lucky with this one. I didn't even know the core of the body of this one is swamp ash, and I didn't even know it was. You can kind of see there's a little bit of flame to it. I didn't even know that it was flamed until I put finish
Wow.
on it. It was like a total bonus on that one.
Yeah, when you get flame and you're not expecting it, that's never a bad thing.
Oh, it's the best. Yeah,
Yeah.
seriously.
So is that also a piece of stabilized wood, or
Yep.
that's really cool. Now, what's going on for the inlays?
So it's the aquamarine polyester that I got from
Cool.
all luthiers that are listening. Go check out masecraftsupply.com, MASE craftsupply.com.
Cool.
They have so many different inlay materials, and it's really good stuff. It's really fun
That's really
working with it.
I've never heard of them, so that's great to know. I'll have to I'll shoot you an email after and
Yeah, they'll be psyched if they find this company, as well the company, I assume. But yeah, all the
cool.
greenish stuff is just polyester, that you polish up real good. They send you a little square chunk of it basically, and
Neat.
you can work with it. And then the turtle is, it's abalone, underneath, acrylic. So it's thicker than your usual abalone. I usually get kind of nervous putting abalone into fretboards because
Oh yeah.
the neck might bend too much, and you got to plane it down so that you impart some less relief to the neck, because the strings are pulling it too far, and then you end up kind of going all the way through the inlay. So I wanted it to be a little thicker. I like it to be about 1/8 of an inch if it's going into the fretboard. But then that was a whole new experience working with the acrylic on top of that, making sure it didn't frost and stuff like that.
Well,
And then I've got little Bacote scute inlays here on the for the turtle shell basically.
so
So
cool.
yeah.
Now I'm noticing basically are you hiding your fret ends as well? It looks like you probably like
Yep. Yeah, I put binding on
Sure.
the
Nice.
fretboards. Yeah,
Nice.
I basically bind all of my fretboards now because filling the
Yeah.
fret slot ends is takes about maybe more time and looks worse than doing the binding does. So I just bind them all.
Isn't it funny
Yeah.
how that works? Yeah.
Yeah,
But
yeah, it really
yeah,
is. It's kind of nice. It's kind of
yeah,
convenient. It looks better and it's
yeah.
faster. You love it when you find
But
something that both looks better and is faster.
your fret ends look beautiful though. Looks like you spend a lot of time on those.
Yes, yes, I do spend a lot of time on them. I had this guy bring in like a real high end, it was like a custom shop, Artcore Ibanez, and each fret end was perfectly rounded. It was almost like they'd put it into a machine that rounded it
Yeah.
perfectly before they put it on. And I've been trying to do as well as them ever since, and I'm still not quite there. But yeah, I really like those little details like the perfectly rounded fret ends and stuff like that. I always try to do that kind of thing, as long as it doesn't take a week.
Yeah. Well, part of me wonders, it would be cool to maybe cut them all to length, ahead of time, and then maybe put them in some sort of a little clamp and actually dress all the fret ends before you even install them. I want to try that at some point. I'm kind of imagining how to do that, but who knows if how it'll work out. But uh,
And you got to be real careful getting them just. I've thought the
yeah,
same
get
thing
them a little bit off
myself. I'm like,
center, and then it's all over. Yeah,
yeah, yeah, and you're
yeah,
like, you got one that's a little too short, one that's a little too long. It's one of
yeah,
those where you think you know how to do it, but then you
yeah,
find some secret method, that's like, oh, that's super elegant. How did you come up with that? And yeah.
yeah. Well, that's it. I mean, you start thinking about trying to, because obviously, with all this stuff, there's like do you cut the do you put the fingerboard on the neck before you cut the taper or after you're working with it when it's all square? I mean, there's so many just ways you can kind of change up the order of how you do things, and it all works, if it works for you, ultimately, just like, we were talking earlier about, not having a planer, sometimes like some things will respond better to a drum sander. Some people don't have a drum sander. Some people will go, only like using planes, or, it depends on, I guess, what you're good with and what you prefer using. And none of it's wrong, but
Yes, it's part of the
yeah,
beauty of the of
yeah,
of the craft, is
yeah,
if you run into someone that says, this is the only right way to do it, usually it's like, well, you
yeah,
might
run
not have been
away.
doing it that long, have you?
Right.
Um, yeah, when my first bass I built, the only power tools I had were a router, a Dremel tool, and like a hand drill.
Yeah.
And so I figured out how to set up my hand planes really well and do all that kind of stuff. It really was, I mean, it took forever and it was arduous
Yeah.
quite a lot of the time, but then it gives you resources for later, when you finally have the drum sander and you're like, oh, thank God, I'm not flattening that top by hand this time entirely.
Really
But
appreciate
then,
it. Yeah.
yeah, oh my gosh, that
Yeah.
that tool, it is my favorite.
It's painful, like decide, okay, I'm making the purchase, but boy, like I don't think I've regretted buying a tool so far. It's like you get that tool, you really need that tool. That
Yeah, I
seems to be the way it
resisted it
goes.
too much in the beginning.
Yeah,
I was like, I don't need to buy that. I'll make my own. I'll
well,
do X, Y, and Z. And it's like, man, once you have the tool, it's
yeah.
like, you
Well,
know, you should have bought it so much sooner than you did.
like we were talking about Tim Sicer earlier, when Tim was on the show, and he was talking about, especially, some of the one, he didn't have a lot of tools, and two, he was in a really small apartment, and same kind of thing where, he didn't have a bandsaw, so he had, like a handheld, jigsaw and a drill. So he was like just drilling all these holes around where the body was going to be, kind of, and just we're just kind of cutting it out by hand, just really taking forever because, a router was going to be too loud, and didn't just all, just working around all of these constraints, essentially. But I guess in a way, you don't end up making any bad purchases, because you really learn pretty quickly really what you do need and what you don't need, which is nice. So there's probably like way less chance of having a remorse, where if you just kind of like, if you just had unlimited funds, you just decide, well, hey, I'm just going to go and outfit a workshop. Let's go. I mean, there's bound to be things you're like, man, I just never use that thing.
Yep. Yeah. Sometimes,
Yeah.
Yeah, it makes you resourceful though. Those
Yeah.
years without the tools, you really, like you were saying, you come up with ways to compensate, and it pays off later. You get it makes you better at what you do.
Well,
Aside from that,
well, right, and you get to learn more than one way to do something, which is certainly useful as well, and you get to come at it a different way, and again, yet even more obstacles, and yet you still want to do it. I mean, so it's you get another vote for, hey, this is what you should be doing.
right? Yeah, because there are days where you're like, have I just wasted the last decade and a half? But most of the time you come back to no, this is I did good. Yeah.
Well, I mean, and you've made. I mean, I don't know how many instruments you probably reckon you've already made, but I mean, these things are gonna are gonna last longer than all of us. Like be around for several lifetimes. So in a way, they're kind of a legacy, right? So there's always gonna be this kind of piece of you that's left behind to somebody else's. This piece of art you make, and somebody else gets to make a piece. Make some art with it, or at least find some enjoyment with it, or whatever. That's just so cool.
Yeah, it is appealing to me that people will
Yep.
continue to play them and continue to get to make their own art. That was part of the reason also I wanted to do it for other people too, is building that first base for myself. I was like, wow, this is, being able to choose everything about it really makes you an instrument that's yours, that's
Yeah.
different and really better than most of the other stuff you can get out there, generally speaking. At least there's obviously some guys that really, Leo Fender got, I'd say, 80-90% of everything close to perfect already.
Yeah.
But
Just
yeah,
nuts.
being able, yeah, I know that man, if
Yeah.
only you could go back and meet him, or like steal some of his brain matter or something. But yeah, the making the instrument for someone that they can't get anywhere else is very satisfying, especially when it kind of inspires them to create new stuff and play better and all that. So what are you playing these days? Like what bass are you playing, and what kind of music are you playing?
Well, I mean, I've played all kinds of different music. I mean, geez, my main band is a progressive metal band. This band called
Sweet.
Divine Regal, and I play primarily a six-string fretless in that band. Just like that's what you play in a progressive metal band, is a six-string fretless. But that bass, it's a Warwick, and it's actually broken right now. It's in pieces. A couple of the screws that were holding down the tailpiece, they just lost their head one day.
Oh,
I looked in one day, and like one of the screw, one of the heads had popped off, and luckily the tailpiece was still holding in place. And so I'm like, okay, well, I'll get through, recording and that sort of thing. And so I went to go remove the other screw, and it just popped off too. So I suspect now that I've gotten it off, it looks as if either some finish or some super glue has gotten into the threads. So I'm kind of I haven't had a chance to really attack it, but I'm trying to figure out how to get these two screws out of the body essentially. So like the base that's actually back there is actually the first bass I ever made, that's fretted, but yeah, but anyway, I've also like played upright in a jazz band that backed up poets before, and there's numerous cover gigs, and I've played bluegrass before. So I like so much music. Um, but
nice. I'm
but
jealous
ultimate,
you've got that much experience with
yeah.
different genres and stuff like that. I always kick myself for waiting till college to start. I wish I'd started when I was like 9.
So so at this point, I mean, on average, I mean, how many of these things do you find yourself? How many do you think you've made so far? Out of curiosity, just back and forth.
Somewhere around 60 or so.
Sure. I mean, so on like a about I mean, again, I know they're all so different, like that. I mean, if you had to say like on average, like about how long, from the time I guess not including design, because obviously sometimes you have to, gosh, the design process could be like staring at a blank piece of paper for days sometimes. But I mean, how long, I mean, how many hours, I guess, do you think like on average does one of these things take for you to make?
Hours wise, I want to say it's like 400-ish
Yeah.
on average. Some of them go, half as, some of them take twice as long as the other ones do, depending on how fancy they are. There's some of them I can get done in a month or two. Some of them take like 3 months.
Yeah.
I'll usually build 3 at a time, just because, to try to maintain efficiency and stuff like that. But it really depends on what people have, what three instruments I'm building at that time. Is it three that I've kind of done everything before on, and I'm like comfortable with everything that's going to be done with them? Or are there, do all three of them have weird curveballs and new things that I haven't done before, and new things that we're trying out? If it's a round of three that are all three challenging, it will take forever. I mean, it can take so much longer, because you do one part and then you get part of it finished, and then you say, you have to kind of go back and tweak some things and try to fix it up, like with that spalted maple base I was telling you about. That one, just the carving on that one probably took 3-4 times as long, because you're between the stabilizing and the carving, and then you lose a chunk where you weren't supposed to lose a chunk, so you have to deepen your carve and start over. And so it really depends with the custom thing. It is such a double-edged sword. It keeps you interested. It keeps you doing new stuff and always taking it to the next level. But again, there are days where you are tired and you're like, I don't have 99% focus for another 9 to 12 hours today. And you're like, why do I do this to myself?
Right. And given that 400 hours is pretty much equivalent to most people working 10 weeks.
Yep.
And I'm that right there, kind of tells you that imagine if you were charging what you should really be charging for these things. Then it becomes not, for anyone who thinks that fedoras are ridiculously priced, it's not too hard to figure out how they can start coming to some of those prices when you start considering the amount of hours that has to be put into some of these things. I don't, especially to someone who's never done woodworking before, let alone a custom instrument. It might be tough. Well, hey, I could buy this sire for $700. You're just not getting the correlation of it.
Yeah, definitely not. I mean, it's with the fedoras aren't even that bad. It as far as prices of musical instruments go, that the fedoras are high, but they're not even that bad. I mean, you can. I have to wonder.
They have a huge range, obviously. Like, some things are, but I think for some, I mean, obviously, like, alembics too. That's a great example. Or Lefay bases from Germany, just made by two brothers. They pretty much, except for the tuners, I think they pretty much make everything themselves. So it's not too hard to figure out. Like, well, yeah, that's why this costs what it costs. I mean, this thing's like a purpose-built, original creation. It's just.
Well, and you can, I might be mistaken on this, but I'm pretty sure you can, get a professional level violin for, they're in like the $20,000-$30,000 range. And that's for, a little short piece of wood like this, it's, half as much, well, an eighth as much material and no electronics. And part of me wonders if part of what happened with the electric guitar industry is just that it kind of it underpriced itself. Guitar Center came along, and being able to have everything built overseas kind of brought everyone's expectations down a little bit too low. And now we're all kind of paying for it in some form or another.
Well, Leo Fender, for instance, I don't think he was even a musician, right? So he was more or less coming out of, from a, more or less like a production, mass production sort of, like frame of mind, I suppose. Whereas most, basically everybody who I know who builds instruments, they were probably a bass player first, or a guitar player first. So I don't know. I mean, call me crazy, but maybe folks that are mostly artistically kind of minded don't necessarily give the business part of it, as much attention, or come at it with as much acumen maybe as they would, with the artistic side of it.
Yeah, it's hard to be as many things as you need to be running this stuff by yourself. I had to figure out how to make websites, and then you have to figure out how to get higher up on your search engine rankings, and then all the usual business stuff, accounting, marketing, all that kind of stuff. I was lucky enough that I had enough of a knack for those things to make it happen. But yeah, I could definitely be a better businessman than I am. A lot of it is the artistic part. A lot of it is the building part. You were saying earlier that so many things goes into building an instrument. Your woodworking and your fretting, which very few things are like fretting. It's its own thing.
Yeah, for sure.
It probably took me 10 years to really get to the point where I could hammer in frets perfectly on anything. So you're kind of, people say, oh, you've got your 10,000 plus hours, you're a master. And I'm like, well, I got 200 hours at this and 200 hours at wiring and 200 hours at that. Like, right. It's still a little ways before you really become a full master of this kind of craft.
Well, right, and like you were talking too about just how different the materials can be. Even if you did have a certain amount of time, let's say like even carving necks or whatever. I mean, then just given how different the material you're working with can be. I mean, then each one of those things, each one of these different timbers kind of basically is a whole other set of challenges that you have to kind of master. In terms of how you approach it. So yeah, it's just crazy the sheer amount of hats you have to wear, and hopefully wear them somewhat well,
right. And then there's just you could just design stuff too. I mean, just the design part of it is it's hard to combine practicality with artistic looks of everything. It's what the first thing I go for with my instruments is practicality and function.
Right.
I want them to be lightweight. I want them to balance on your leg or with a strap first, and then the pretty stuff comes later. So that's always tough combining those two. I mean, it's hard, but it's very satisfying when you nail it. And then other people have to like it, not just you,
Yeah.
And that's one of the things that I lose a lot of sleep over is that, you never really get inside your client's head. You don't know exactly what their expectations are, what they want. They say they want a wobbly sound, or there's so many adjectives for all the different tones you can get. You hope that what you think is a growly tone is the same as what they think, and they're going to like it when they get it. And it's funny, a lot of the time when I finish a bass, almost every single bass I've ever finished, the first week or two that I play it before I send it out, I'm like, it's all right. Okay. This, I thought it was going to come out a little better than this. And then, you get a little distance from it and pick it up the last time before it goes out the door. And you're like, okay, this is a good bass. This came out well. I'm actually pretty happy with it. So I usually tell my clients that exact story. I'm like, give it a week or two. It's still getting used to being a bass as opposed to a conglomerate of woods, and your own interaction with it, your own expectations are, you always expect more than reality can give. And so once you get over that a little bit, you can actually appreciate it for what it is and not the ultimate, fantastic God bass that everyone expects it to be. Yeah, it's hard not to be too hard on yourself. It's sometimes I'll poke at some, little blemish or something for a few hours, and then I'll bring it into my wife and say, can you see this right here? Would you see this mistake I made right here? And she puts on her glasses and, looks right up close to her face. And she says, I don't see anything. You are insane.
Right.
And then you go, okay, I can set that aside for now.
Just a solving problems thing to be able to move on. That's a whole thing that, I think folks maybe necessarily don't understand until they, start doing a project like this, I guess.
I still look at basses that I finish and I go, wow, I built that.
Yeah, which is
it's so like beautiful, so cool, and magnificent. It's like, wow, how did I get there? And like you said, the steps are so slow. You were there for every single one, but then one day you look at it and you glued in the neck and you're like, wow, it's a bass now. Awesome.
Yeah, like that one hanging up behind you. I mean, I imagine, like, I mean, you just look at them, and again, you're kind of like one, you're probably critiquing yourself, but also, you should be impressed with what you've done. But then obviously that also influences what you do after that, and so it's like you're never not working on it, right? I mean, just the act of looking at it and contemplating it is in some way doing some sort of work. It's gonna inform what you decide to do down the road and how you approach it, and maybe or change your approach or whatever.
I've got a huge document of, like, it's basically notes to myself after I made a mistake or did something that took too long. It's like to remind yourself for the next time, whenever you do this, and then, in big bold, you're like, don't do this, stupid, next time. Remember what happened in 2020 when you tried it this way. Next time, don't do it that way.
that'd be cool.
Well, I probably will one of these days. I'll probably eventually I'll probably make a video series and a book and stuff like that, especially doing this much custom stuff. Because when this is not a dig at anyone that makes models, because their standard models are dialed in and almost always perfect, and they really do a great job with that. But getting the chance to do so much custom stuff, I'd imagine I know a few things that's a lot of guys out there don't.
For sure. Yeah, I mean, that makes so much sense. But that being said, I mean, that's again part of the genius of Leo Fender, just the idea of like, when you go and you do make, all these custom things, part of you starts thinking of like, well, if I was going to make this same thing over and over again, what would I change, and what about the order of operations, or how I do something that could, cut down, make it like a more, more efficient, cut out any unnecessary steps, that maybe didn't, after you get a chance to step away from it, like, well, maybe I could like wait to do that part here and then do this part there, kind of like looking at it from a production perspective, as opposed to just just making a one-off perspective. That's a whole other art in and of itself, I think. Just like, moving, to mass, the mass production idea, it's just
absolutely. Yeah. There's so much more it's so much different making a standard model, because it's like you said, you're balancing production with, perfection and what you want. It's like, well, this will take me 3 times longer if I do it this way. And if I do it this way, it's 15% less good, but it takes me a third of the time. And that's I've spent so many nights laying awake in bed, kind of designing the model in my head. What the first Xylem standard model will be like.
What are you like working on now?
I got I got three instruments going. One is that 5-string that I showed you the mock-up of, with the moon and the earth on it. Actually, that's this side. This one right here is the neck for that one.
I'll have to see when it's done. You should
see that piece of the week.
That'd be fantastic.
I'll shoot you pictures. I'd love to be
featured.
That'd be amazing.
That'd be cool.
I'm working on that one. It's a 5-string. We're trying to make it as light as possible. I've got some really, really lightweight swamp ash for the body of that one.
It's not so easy to come by anymore.
It actually, it really isn't. I lucked out. I got 5 or 6 huge. I probably have 12, 13 bodies worth of like 6/4 swamp ash right now, because and it was cheap. At least for swamp ash, it was cheap. So I got lucky on that one. You always feel good every time you pass it in the wood room. You're like, yeah, that was a score, But we're trying to make that one as light and ergonomic as possible. It's fan fret, so I think we're doing 33.5 on the low B down to 30.5 on the G string for the scale lengths on that one. It's got Aguilar, some of their new, I think they're linear humbuckers. I think they're single coil shaped humbuckers with an OBP3 preamp in that one. Then I've got a guitar. I get another stabilized wood guitar for a local guy here in Durango, Colorado. That's going to have black limba underneath, kind of a greenish top on that one. Just a couple Seymour Duncans in that one. That one's pretty. Oops, wrong side. It's about.
I know,
this,
right?
Yeah, I'm not used to the mirror on this. I haven't used Zoom very much. It's that shape roughly. That's going to a local guy, actually a young guy. His grandpa bought it for him. That Zeke is like, I think 12 or 13 now. So he's going to be pretty psyched on that one when it's finished. And then the other one is a 4-string with a ball scroll for the bighorn, and that one's got a Wenge top and a mahogany body. It's got some Seymour Duncan bass lines, pickups in it, and one of the Seymour Duncan preamps. So it's actually aside from the fanned fret one, it's a pretty mellow round of instruments for me. They're all pretty, I've gotten past all the, the tricky stuff on this round where I'm like, how's that going to go? How's this going to go? I'm about halfway through. I'll be able to hopefully cut out the bodies in about a week. So the necks are basically done. So that's what I'm working on right now.
Cool. I mean, have you made many fan frets so far? I know that like I can almost foresee a time that fan frets are going to become like a standard thing.
Yeah, I wonder the same. This is my first fan fret actually, cool. And I'm super.
Sure, that posed some interesting challenges.
Definitely, yeah. I mean, it was.
This, yeah.
I had thought about it enough, for years ahead of time that I was pretty ready. I didn't really have too much trouble with it, but it is so much more time intensive slotting a fan fretboard. Sure. It takes forever to do that, and you're especially your first one, you're kind of like, okay, is this right? You're always double checking your figures and stuff. But yeah, I wonder if fan frets are going to become standard, especially with bass guitars with that low B. Making a 38-inch scale low B, you just cannot beat that. It is hard to get a low B to sound that good. Even 36 is pretty darn good. That's when it kind of tames the floppiness and the intonation and all that kind of stuff with a low B string. It's still, I feel like that's still not there, the technology in general for low B strings. But yeah, for anything with a lower string, I'd say my next 5 or 6 string that I build for myself will probably be a fan fret.
Yeah, I mean, it just makes so much sense. I mean, obviously, you open up a piano, and the low strings are so long, and the high strings are short. It just makes a ton of sense. I mean, I guess a lot of it is just like that equaling of tension, and make the timbre of the strings more even across the board, so it doesn't sound like a 4-string bass and some limp noodle of a B string that doesn't sound like anything else,
Yeah, and it does seem like each string sort of has its own, sweet spot, because I built a few 36-inch scale 6 strings, and the B and the E are perfect. You can just abuse them. They sound amazing no matter what you do with them. But then the G string kind of starts to sound a little thin. Even with that, you lose out.
Well, it makes a lot of sense. I mean, the one thing that I kind of remarked on when I played a friend's dingwall was that where if I put a heavier B string on my 34-inch scaling bass, it's like, yeah, I can get all the open strings to sound pretty similar to each other and have very do all the gauges, so all the tensions within a couple pounds of each other, and it sounds pretty good. But the B string only really sounds good up to about the 5th or 6th fret, and it starts to get like weird wolf tones. And whereas when you have that longer fingerboard and less tension, it seems like now you can play the B string like up to like the 12th fret, and it still sounds right on. So it seems like that's kind of where the real advantage is like more of the string is even playable, and it's not just the open string. It's just like it's fixing the timbre, but it's also kind of fixing some of those wolf tone, weird overtone kind of things as well.
Yeah, indeed. I heard that's why Sheldon at Dingwall, right? Sheldon, that's his name, right?
Yeah, Sheldon. Yeah.
Dingwall? Yeah. I heard that was basically his idea behind doing the fan fret. For his basses in the first place. Is he's like, no one likes a low B, and no one likes a 38-inch scale bass, for every single string. I mean, some people do, but man, it's tough to play a 38.
Yeah, well, right, and having played upright before, I mean, it's like 41 inches, so especially like down low, I mean, pretty much, and I've got decent sized hands, but I mean, I'm pretty much like this, in first position to just do a whole step basically, so it's definitely a kind of a physical sort of thing, for sure. But no, it definitely it certainly just makes the instrument more playable on the whole instrument, and especially if you're playing more in the middle of the fretboard. Now there's like you see like 7-string jazz guitar players, I guess, is a great example, where they're comping all these kind of bass lines underneath their chord shapes because they can they've got that extra string where they can grab a whole bunch of notes. Well, if you've got a low B string that isn't really playable or doesn't really sound great beyond like the 5th or 6th fret, then it's kind of pointless, other than from the 5th or 6th fret and below. I mean, it just it may as well just not exist.
Now you've got a too wide neck. Like
right.
You got that much wider neck for those 5 notes down at the nut.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I always tell my customers that a four string is still a bass and a five string is still a bass. But then as soon as you hit a six string, it's kind of a different instrument at that point. You know, now you're kind of playing a tree trunk as opposed to
Very
a
much.
bass guitar. Yeah, it's huge. And I mean, I'll almost always do sound samples for my website of instruments before I send them home. And anything that's a six or above that, you know, it's so much harder on you doing sound samples. You're
for sure.
sore. And then you go back to a four string, which is what I usually play. And you're like, wow, I'm good at this. You know, it's so much easier to play a four than it's a six. You know, with the six, it's so cumbersome.
Man, this is great. Thank you so much for coming on. I could probably talk with you all day.
Yeah, likewise. It's been really fun, Frank. Thank you so much for having me on. And you know, if you want to do this again at some point in a year or two, I would love that. Yeah. It's been really fun talking to you, Frank.
Oh, it's been a pleasure, Anthony. It's been great. If I can help you with anything, just let me know.
Will do. Absolutely. Sure. Likewise.
Awesome.
Thank you so much. We're super excited. Frankie and I are working really hard on putting these things together and giving you lots of interviews just like this one. We just need to get some love out there in order to get this podcast surfaced. And thanks for listening.